People often imagine structure as the opposite of freedom because they first encounter it as something imposed. A schedule tells them when to arrive, a boundary tells them where to stop, a responsibility tells them what cannot be abandoned merely because desire has changed. From the surface, structure appears to reduce possibility by narrowing the number of available movements. Yet the Capricorn tone does not begin with restriction as punishment. It begins with the recognition that consciousness cannot become reliable until it learns how to remain present inside a form. The Oversoul does not choose Capricorn because it desires a life of burden for its own sake. It chooses this tone when the incarnation requires a deeper relationship with containment, consequence, endurance, and the intelligent use of limitation. Something within that being is preparing to discover what can only be known through sustained contact with reality. Inspiration may reveal a direction, but direction alone cannot build a life. Capricorn enters where vision must acquire bones strong enough to stand beneath its own weight. This is why Capricorn energy is so often misunderstood by those who equate spiritual expansion with the removal of all boundaries. They assume that greater consciousness should feel increasingly unrestricted, spontaneous, and untouched by obligation. But a consciousness that cannot keep its word, regulate its impulses, or remain steady when excitement disappears is not yet free in the way it imagines. It is merely moving according to whichever force is strongest in the moment. Capricorn exposes that dependency by asking whether your freedom still exists when it must become dependable. Consider how many people feel alive when beginning something and imprisoned when required to maintain it. They love the first decision, the first vision, the first surge of possibility, but begin to resent the ordinary repetition through which possibility becomes actual. The morning arrives without ceremony, the work remains unfinished, and no emotional reward appears to justify another hour of devotion. This is where the Capricorn tone begins speaking most clearly. It reveals that the architecture of becoming is built during the hours when identity receives no applause for continuing. A boundary is not always a wall placed against your expansion. Sometimes it is the edge that allows your energy to gather rather than scatter across every available opening. Water without containment spreads thinly until it can no longer move with force, while water given a channel can cross a landscape. In the same way, a life without chosen limits may contain many experiences while producing very little depth. Capricorn teaches that concentration is not a denial of possibility, but a decision about which possibility will be permitted to mature. This does not mean every structure deserves obedience. Human beings inherit systems built from fear, domination, habit, and the preservation of authority, and Capricorn consciousness is not fulfilled by becoming loyal to them. Sacred structure must be distinguished from dead structure. Dead structure protects itself even when it no longer serves life, while sacred structure remains accountable to the life it was created to support. The mature Capricorn tone does not worship the container. It strengthens, repairs, or dismantles the container according to what consciousness is trying to become within it. The resistance to structure often contains more than a desire for freedom. It may conceal the fear that commitment will reveal the limits of one's present capacity. As long as a person remains uncommitted, nearly every potential identity can be preserved in imagination. They can still believe they might have become the artist, leader, healer, builder, or teacher whose work never had to encounter resistance. Structure ends that fantasy by bringing ability into contact with consequence. Once the work is begun and repeated, the imagined self must give way to the measured self. This contact can feel cruel because reality does not flatter intention. A person may care deeply and still be unprepared, possess talent and still lack discipline, understand the vision, and still fail to build the habits that could carry it. Capricorn does not interpret these discoveries as evidence of worthlessness. It treats them as structural information. Where the foundation cracks, reinforcement becomes possible, but only after the crack is no longer hidden beneath the beauty of the design. The Capricorn incarnation may therefore experience limitation more intensely than others, not because the Oversoul has rejected ease, but because limitation becomes the classroom in which capacity is made visible. There may be early responsibilities, delayed rewards, demanding environments, or repeated confrontations with what cannot be bypassed. Such experiences can create bitterness when they are interpreted only as deprivation, yet they can also produce a rare interior solidity when the being begins to understand what those pressures are developing. Weight becomes instruction when it teaches the structure how to bear more without collapsing. Time is another of Capricorn's sacred instruments. Many tones encounter time as sequence, opportunity, memory, or change. But Capricorn encounters it as a force that reveals what is real. Enthusiasm can imitate devotion for a week, and fear can imitate caution for a season. But time eventually separates temporary states from enduring commitments. What repeatedly survives contact with difficulty begins to show its deeper substance. Capricorn trusts this revealing power even when the human personality wants immediate proof. Patience within this tone is not passive waiting. It is the ability to continue participating in a process whose meaning has not yet become visible. A seed beneath the ground does not provide daily evidence that its hidden labor will succeed, and much of human development follows the same pattern. You practice before skill appears, remain honest before trust is restored, and build foundations before anyone can see the structure rising. Capricorn learns to recognize that invisible preparation is still movement. This relationship with time can become distorted when patience is confused with endless postponement. A person may tolerate stagnation, neglect, or emotional absence while telling themselves they are being mature. They may remain inside a role long after its purpose has expired because endurance has become central to their identity. Capricorn must eventually learn that persistence is sacred only when it remains in relationship with truth. Staying is not always strength, just as leaving is not always failure. The deeper test is whether duration is producing refinement or merely repeating depletion. Sacred patience increases clarity, skill, integrity, and the capacity to meet reality more fully. Empty endurance reduces aliveness while preserving the appearance of loyalty. From outside, both may look like someone continuing through difficulty, but their inner movements are different. One is building a stronger vessel, while the other is sacrificing life to prove that it can withstand its absence. Many Capricorn-toned people learn early to delay their own needs because something around them appears more urgent. They become the dependable one, the organizer, the person who notices what will happen if no one takes responsibility. Others may praise their strength without recognizing how quickly praise can become permission to keep placing more weight upon them. Over time, competence attracts obligation. The person who can carry much may forget that capacity does not create an eternal duty to carry everything. Responsibility is sacred only when it is conscious. Unconscious responsibility is often driven by fear. Fear that everything will fall apart, that love will be withdrawn, that others will suffer, or that one's worth will disappear if one is no longer useful. In that state, the individual does not choose the burden but becomes psychologically fused with it. They may call it loyalty while secretly resenting everyone who depends upon them. Capricorn refinement requires the courage to separate genuine stewardship from compulsive overfunctioning. This distinction can be difficult because the outer behavior may remain almost identical. The same person may still arrive early, keep promises, manage resources, and protect what has been entrusted to them. Yet one version acts from an inner compulsion that cannot rest, while the other acts from deliberate alignment. One believes catastrophe will follow if control is loosened, and the other understands both responsibility and proportion. Sacred structure includes room for recovery because a foundation continuously stripped of its resources eventually fails. Mastery emerges when responsibility no longer functions as a performance of worth. The person stops using achievement to argue for their right to exist and begins building because the work itself has become an honest expression of capacity. This changes the texture of discipline. Effort remains, but it is no longer accompanied by the same desperate demand that every result confirm personal value. Capricorn becomes less severe when it no longer needs accomplishment to defend the soul against shame. True mastery is quieter than ambition imagines. It is often visible in the small correction made before anyone notices an error, the preparation completed when recognition is unlikely, and the willingness to improve what is already considered good enough. It does not need to announce its seriousness because seriousness has entered the work itself. The master is not merely someone who has repeated a task many times. The master is someone whose perception has been refined by repetition until they can detect what haste would overlook. This is why Capricorn is connected not only with construction, but with standards. Standards reveal what a person is willing to preserve when convenience invites compromise. Yet standards can become another dead structure when they are used to punish imperfection rather than guide refinement. A sacred standard calls the work upward without reducing the worker to their current limitations. It creates a direction of integrity rather than a courtroom in which every unfinished quality becomes evidence against the self. Perfectionism often appears near Capricorn because both care about quality, but they arise from different inner arrangements. Mastery understands that quality develops through contact, correction, failure, and time. Perfectionism demands that the early form conceal the fact that development is still occurring. It would rather delay creation than allow incompleteness to be witnessed. Capricorn heals when it realizes that a strong structure is not one that never required repair, but one that was built honestly enough to be repaired. The three movements begin to meet here. Containment gathers energy, time reveals substance, and responsibility converts capacity into reliable form. None of them is sufficient alone. Structure without time becomes rigidity because it cannot adapt through experience. Time without responsibility becomes drift because duration alone does not create development. Responsibility without intelligent containment becomes exhaustion because the person attempts to serve everything and therefore cannot build anything deeply. The Oversoul choosing Capricorn is choosing an encounter with the laws by which potential enters matter. It is choosing to learn that purpose must survive scheduling, fatigue, uncertainty, correction, and the slow education of consequence. This is not a lesser spirituality than vision, intuition, or revelation. It is the field in which revelation proves whether it can become inhabitable. A truth that cannot shape behavior remains luminous but structurally absent. You may recognize this tone in the places where life keeps asking you to become more dependable without becoming more imprisoned. You may feel it where an old structure can no longer hold you, but the new one has not yet been built. You may encounter it in the responsibility that is truly yours, the burden that never was, the promise that must be kept, or the standard that must become kinder without becoming weaker. Capricorn does not offer freedom from form. It offers the deeper freedom of becoming conscious enough to create, inhabit, and eventually transform the forms through which your life is made real. The danger begins when structure becomes sacred merely because it has endured. Longevity can make an arrangement appear wise, even when it has only become difficult to question. A family role may survive for generations. An institution may preserve its rituals, and a personal discipline may continue long after the life inside it has disappeared. Time reveals substance, but time also gives distortion enough repetition to disguise itself as truth. What remains is not always what was meant to remain. This unsettles the confidence that endurance alone can reveal what is real. Some structures persist because everyone within them has been trained to fear what might happen if they stop participating. Some promises are kept because shame is stronger than discernment, and some traditions survive because no one remembers who first benefited from them. The human personality may then call its obedience maturity because obedience feels more honorable than admitting fear. Capricorn must learn that persistence can preserve illusion as faithfully as it preserves integrity. The structure surrounding an incarnation is not automatically the structure selected by the Oversoul. Human systems intercept spiritual tones and translate them through their own unfinished consciousness. A being may arrive carrying a sacred relationship with responsibility, and find that this capacity is immediately recruited by a family that refuses to become responsible for itself. The child becomes useful before becoming known. What began as an incarnational strength can then be shaped into a survival function. This person may later believe they were born to carry what others abandoned. Their history will seem to support the belief because they have repeatedly been one capable of holding everything together. Yet repetition does not prove destiny when the repetition was organized by an early wound. Capacity and assignment are not the same. The fact that you can bear a burden does not reveal whether the burden belongs within your path. This distinction destabilizes the idea of responsibility more deeply than simply learning to set boundaries. A boundary can still be created from the same identity that believes it must manage every outcome. The person may say no while monitoring how everyone responds, withdraw from a role while secretly preparing to rescue the system when it begins to fail, or rest only after ensuring no one will experience discomfort because of their absence. The visible burden has been released, but the inner architecture remains intact. Control has changed its behavior without surrendering its throne. Responsibility often appears virtuous because its damage is socially rewarded. The exhausted caretaker is praised for selflessness. The relentless worker is admired for discipline. And the person who never needs help is treated as unusually strong. Few ask what kind of world is being built when reliability requires one person to become increasingly absent from themselves. Competence can conceal injury more effectively than collapse, because collapse eventually forces attention. Functioning allows the wound to become foundational. The Capricorn tone may therefore become attached not only to structure but to indispensability. Being needed provides a stable identity when being loved feels less certain. If people depend on your performance, your place among them appears guaranteed, even when intimacy remains absent. You know why they call, what they expect, and which part of you will receive recognition. Usefulness becomes a substitute for belonging because usefulness seems measurable. Yet the cost of indispensability is that the surrounding system never develops beyond its dependence upon you. Every time you solve what others refuse to learn, you strengthen the very weakness that requires your continued presence. Every time you absorb a consequence before it reaches its source, you prevent reality from teaching the lesson you claim to understand. The responsible person may believe they are preserving order, while unknowingly preserving immaturity. Their competence becomes a shelter beneath which unconsciousness survives. This is the first inversion Capricorn must face. Responsibility can become irresponsible when it removes the consequences required for growth. Protection is not always care. Assistance is not always support. A structure that prevents every fracture may also prevent the formation of strength. The deepest stewardship sometimes permits what the controlling personality experiences as avoidable disorder. This is difficult because Capricorn often recognizes consequences earlier than others. It sees the unpaid cost, the weak joint, the unfinished preparation, and the future collapse already contained within present neglect. To remain silent can feel dishonest, while allowing the consequence to arrive can feel cruel. The person experiences themselves standing beside a structure they could repair while watching someone else refuse to learn how. Discernment is required precisely because capability produces no automatic instruction about intervention. There are moments when intervention is necessary because the vulnerable would otherwise bear the cost of another person's avoidance. There are also moments when intervention merely transfers that cost onto the capable, ensuring the original pattern continues unchanged. From the outside, both actions may look compassionate. The difference is revealed by what the intervention makes possible afterward. Sacred responsibility restores participation, while compulsive responsibility makes continued non-participation easier. The second destabilization enters through mastery itself. Mastery was allowed to appear as the refinement produced by repetition, patience, and honest correction. But mastery can become a sophisticated defense against being affected by life. A person may become so skilled at regulating expression, anticipating difficulty, and maintaining control that nothing reaches them without first passing through management. Their competence is real, yet the self inhabiting it has become increasingly inaccessible. Such a person rarely appears unstable. They know how to behave during crisis, how to speak without revealing too much, and how to turn pain into a plan before pain has finished arriving. They may be admired for their composure while privately experiencing life as a sequence of conditions to be handled. Every feeling is organized, every need evaluated, and every uncertainty converted into action. Structure no longer supports experience. It prevents experience from becoming unstructured enough to change them. This is not the mastery of form, but captivity within form. The individual has learned how to keep the vessel from breaking, but not how to let new life rearrange what the vessel was built to contain. They can survive loss without asking whose survival has made them, continue through disappointment without allowing disappointment to revise their direction, and remain productive while the deeper self withdraws from the work. Endurance becomes a way of postponing transformation. The structure remains standing because the inhabitant has quietly left. Capricorn's relationship with control often begins in environments where unpredictability carried a real cost. Planning reduced danger, competence reduced criticism, and emotional restraint prevented additional disorder. These adaptations should not be dismissed as simple resistance, because they once protected something essential. Yet a structure built for danger cannot become a permanent home without eventually misreading peace as vulnerability. The body continues preparing for collapse even after the conditions have changed. You may recognize this in the inability to enjoy what has finally become stable. Instead of inhabiting the life you work to create, you search its surfaces for the next threat to its continuity. Rest feels irresponsible because vigilance was once the price of safety. Receiving help feels inefficient because dependence once increased uncertainty. The very stability you desired becomes another responsibility to defend. This reveals why freedom cannot be reduced to consciously inhabiting structure. Consciousness itself may be shaped by the structure it is attempting to evaluate. You can choose a routine because your fear approves of it, maintain a standard because shame calls it excellence, and honor a commitment because abandonment terror has disguised itself as loyalty. The choice feels deliberate because no one is visibly forcing it. Yet internalized authority can speak in your own voice. The question is no longer merely whether a structure supports life. It is whether you can perceive life apart from the demands through which you learn to measure it. If worth has always been confirmed by accomplishment, a day without production may register as emptiness rather than existence. If love has always followed reliability, disappointing someone may feel like moral failure rather than relational information. If security has always depended upon prediction, spontaneity may appear childish even when it carries the next honest movement. External structures can be revised more easily than these inner equations. A person can leave the demanding position and recreate its pressure inside a quieter life. They can reject the authority figure while continuing to speak to themselves in that figure's tone. They can abandon the old schedule and fill every open hour with self-improvement. The architecture persists because its deepest beams were never made of circumstance. Capricorn must therefore encounter a form of deconstruction that cannot be completed by rebellion. Opposition still organizes itself around the structure it opposes. The person who refuses every commitment because commitment once imprisoned them remains governed by their former captivity. The person who rejects all standards because standards were weaponized has not become free of the weapon. They have allowed it to determine which capacities may never be developed. Freedom requires something more demanding than compliance or refusal. It requires the ability to remain present while an old structure loses authority before a new one has proven itself. This interval can feel more threatening than the burden that preceded it. There may be no schedule capable of guaranteeing direction, no role capable of confirming identity, and no achievement capable of proving the transition is justified. The person must stand inside unmeasured time without converting uncertainty into immediate construction. Capricorn, which understands foundations, must learn not to pour one too quickly. This waiting is different from the patience of sustained building. It is patience without a visible structure to serve. Nothing is yet asking for a discipline in a recognizable form, and this absence can awaken the suspicion that life is being wasted. The old identity demands a project because projects organize value, but the deeper intelligence may be withholding form until desire can be distinguished from conditioning. Here, the three vectors turn toward one another without becoming simple. Inherited authority determines which burdens appear sacred. Control determines which structures feel safe, and mastery determines how effectively the person can continue without confronting either one. Together, they can produce a life of extraordinary accomplishment that remains loyal to an arrangement the soul never intended to preserve. The outer structure may be admirable, durable, and useful to others. None of those qualities proves that the being is still meant to inhabit it. The Capricorn frequency is not fulfilled by building what lasts. It is fulfilled by developing the discernment to know what deserves duration, what must be permitted to end, and what should never have required endurance in the first place. This discernment cannot be reached through efficiency because efficiency asks how to preserve motion, not whether motion remains aligned. It cannot be reached through duty alone because duty often speaks most loudly when identity is threatened. It emerges when the person becomes willing to disappoint the structure in order to discover the life beneath it. This may require allowing others to misinterpret your withdrawal. Those who benefited from your overfunctioning may describe your proportion as selfishness. Those who understood your steadiness as permanent availability may experience your limits as betrayal. A system rarely recognizes liberation from its dependence as liberation. It experiences the returning of responsibility as loss. You may be tempted to explain yourself until everyone agrees that your transformation is reasonable, but this can become another attempt to manage the consequences of becoming honest. Some structures will only reveal their true nature when you stop giving them the response they were built to extract. Their instability may not be evidence that your decision was wrong. It may be the first visible measurement of how much hidden labor your presence had been supplying. The sacred foundation is not the one that prevents all collapse. It is the one that remains truthful about what can stand, what requires repair, and what is being held upright by a life that can no longer afford the cost. Capricorn eventually discovers that demolition can be an act of stewardship when preservation would make deeper integrity impossible. Yet even this understanding must not become a new command to destroy whatever feels heavy. Some weight is the pressure of growth, and some is the evidence of misalignment. No formula can remove the need for presence here. The same difficulty can ask one person to remain and another to leave. The same commitment can become devotion in one season and avoidance in the next. The same discipline can gather a scattered life or imprison a life that has already become too controlled. Sacred structure is not identified by its appearance, but by the consciousness it develops through continued relationship. The Capricorn Oversoul does not choose a fixed architecture and command the human being to preserve it forever. It chooses a field in which architecture itself must become conscious. The incarnation learns not only how to build, but how building affects the builder, how support can become dependency, how endurance can conceal fear, and how mastery can protect a self that no longer knows how to be touched. The lesson is not that structure produces freedom. The lesson is that only a consciousness willing to question its structures can discover which forms are capable of carrying freedom without quietly replacing it.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.